Welcome in, I'm Artris, and in this video we're going to be going over some tips and reviewing some of the cards that will help you win your One Piece card game 2nd anniversary pre-release tournament. Now usually I like to put these videos out a little bit in advance so that you have some time to review over what I talk about. However, I did come out with this video a little bit later than usual, so apologies there. But if you're watching it now, it's not too late because the event does start December 6th and it lasts until December 27th. Now if you're unfamiliar with how these events work, usually in a sealed event you're given 6 packs, and from those 6 packs you have to construct a deck of 40 cards to be able to play in these sealed events. That being said, a lot of the cards you get are random, but there are some card choices you can make to help make sure that you are picking the best cards for your deck. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to drop a like and a sub before we get into the tips and tricks and all the cards. It helps out the channel immensely. I cannot thank you enough for the support. Starting in OP-09, we'll do 2 videos a week. And that will be something to look forward to. Usually I do 1 video a week, but we're going to start doing 2 soon, so make sure to sub for all of that good content coming out. Also, if you'd like to talk about the One Piece card game outside of the YouTube comments with a community of, I guess, a bunch of nerds that like One Piece, right? I mean, that's me, right? So please make sure to join the Discord. The link is in the description below. Would love to have you. For these sealed events, you usually are allowed to bring your own leader. In some instances, some stores will allow you to play the Rainbow Luffy, but for the most part, you can choose your leader to bring to these things. There's a handful of leaders that I think are pretty solid to bring in different colors, so let's go over those quickly before we go into OP-09 as a set. Starting off, we have Starter Deck 1 Luffy in red. Activate main once per turn. Give this leader or up to one of your characters 1 Rested Dawn. That effect is just generically good. We have another card in red from OP-01. Zoro, a Dawn ×1, your turn, all of your characters gains 1,000 power, so that's another good, just generic static effect. We also have Monkey D. Dragon from OP-07. This one's probably not as popular, but it is still a strong effect where you can activate main once per turn, give up to a total of 2 of your currently attached Dawn to one of your characters, so that does come up. It's like a version of the Luffy we just saw, but maybe in a different way. A couple of green leaders which might be of interest to you are Eustace Captain Kidd from Starter Deck 2. Usually this one is a strong pick for a lot of these events. It's an activate main once per turn, pay 3 Dawn. You may trash 1 card from your hand and then set this leader as active, so oftentimes people will use this to go for game. A newer addition to the leaders to choose from is Jewelry Bonnie from OP-07, and this is probably the strongest leader to choose at these events. You'll see it quite often. It's a when opponent attacks once per turn, you may pay 1 Dawn and then rest up to one of your opponent's leaders or characters, so this basically just nullifies an attack, which is very strong. In blue, we have Crocodile from Starter Deck 3. This one's not nearly as popular as the others, but it is still worth mentioning. You can activate main once per turn, and then Dawn -4, return up to 1 character with a cost of 5 or less to the owner's hand. In yellow, we have Charlotte Katakuri from OP-03. It's a Dawn ×1 when attacking. Look at up to 1 life card from the top of you or your opponent's life area and put it either on the top or the bottom of the life area. Then this leader gains 1,000 power for this battle. Being able to see what life is coming up for your opponent and adjust your game plan on what they might be getting is pretty strong. And then just the 1 Dawn investment and then gaining an additional 1,000 power for your leader is also very powerful. From OP-06, we have Yamato, so in green and yellow. It's a 4-life leader. This one I wouldn't recommend nearly as much because it is 4-life, and 4-life is a dangerous spot to be in these events. However, it does have double attack, which is very strong, and then the activate main once per turn effect is if your opponent has 3 or less life, attach up to 2 Rested Dawn to one of your characters. Once again, the double attack here is the big thing you want to look out for. One that I haven't mentioned before, but I actually think is a pretty sleeper pick for these events is Red Yellow Sabo from the Starter Deck 13. It's a Dawn ×1 activate main once per turn. You may add 1 of your cost 3 or higher characters with 7,000 power or higher to the top of your life face up, and then give up to one of your characters plus 2,000 power until the start of your next turn. So you are sustaining yourself plus also buffing one of the characters on the board. So that effect right there will help prolong games, and you can also bypass some of these annoying effects like bonding, resting something, because then you can just put that card up into life if you so choose. And then some new additions from OP-09 that I think are worth trying out. You have Shanks in red. It's a once per turn. You may activate this effect when your opponent attacks. Give up to one of your opponent's leader or characters -1,000 power for the turn. This is card advantage in disguise because his effect is allowing you to have an additional 1k counter in your hand every turn. And then one that I don't know if is actually strong or not, but would be worth trying out is Nico Robin in purple and yellow. A 4-life leader is the reason why I say it might not be worth it. but it does have Banish built into the leader, which is something we haven't seen before and could be very interesting to play around. The when attacking is not nearly as useful, but it is you may trash one card with a trigger from your hand and then add up to one Dawn card from your Dawn deck and set it as rested. Typically in these events, you don't want to trash cards from your hand, but you do get a little bit of a payoff, and if you have a dead card in hand, then you can just get rid of it. Also, it has to be trigger though, so there are some stipulations, but the Banish alone could be worth trying this leader out. All right, now that we've talked about the leaders to choose, I think what's always really important to go over before we talk about what cards are good from the set is the method of priority for picking cards to go into your deck. And I use the acronym GRAPE, which stands for Game Winners, Removal, Advantage, Protection, and everything else. So in that order, those are the cards that you're going to want to add to your deck as far as priority goes. So obviously the Game Winners are the cards that are going to win you the games, right? The Game Winners. They're the bombs in the deck, the things that are going to hit the field and your opponent cannot answer them. And if they don't answer it, then you probably win the game from there. Removal, very straightforward, is cards that can help answer the cards on your opponent's side of the field. Removal is hard to come by in a lot of limited sets. However, I think in OP-09, we have a fair amount of removal cards, as we'll see soon, so that's actually really nice that it is a high priority thing to pick, and we do have a lot of options in this set. Advantage, for me, just simply means card advantage, so being able to either draw or filter out your hand, or even maybe deny your opponent cards, so that can count as card advantage in general. Protection are any kind of blockers or 2Ks or counter events that will help keep your units alive, or more importantly, keep you alive. And everything else is, well, everything else. If there's something in your deck that may not fit within the G, R, A, or P, and then you feel like it could be a good fit into your deck, then might as well put it in. Because deck space is, limited, but also the amount of cards you're getting are limited, you are going to probably have to fit a few duds in here and there, but everything else should encompass probably more so like vanillas, like baseline 4/6s, 5/7 stat lines, things like that. Anything that has counter in it is also very useful. Maybe cards that have decent effects. They might not fit into the other categories and might not have the best stat line, but it could still be worth putting into the deck because you have something to play at the end of the day. So going over Game Winners, there's not a lot of bombs in this set. Usually there are not a lot of bombs anyway. Usually you'll get like 2 to 3, maybe 4 if you're lucky. But in this set, we do have, I believe, 4. But to start us off in red, we have the 10-cost Shanks. It's a 12,000 power rush unit that says all of your opponent's characters have minus 1,000 power. This is one of the strongest cards to come from One Piece in a while, in my opinion. And keep in mind that what I'm showing here are going to be alt arts, which you're probably not going to come across very often. So if you want to see what the base rarity version looks like, make sure you reference the One Piece website where they have a whole database of cards that you can look at. Additionally, something I'm not going to cover in the Game Winners that's important to note is that there are some specialized reprints of cards from other sets that will be included. Usually I include these in some of the Grape method. However, I think it's important to note that these are really hard to find anyway, so it might not be worth adding into the review. And so onward from there, let's talk about Odin, which is a 9-cost, 10,000 power body. This is a common, by the way, so you're probably going to come across this much more often than like the Shanks we just showed. But what's important here is that it has a huge stat line and it's got double attack. And the other thing here is on KO, which I doubt anybody's going to be able to KO this thing, but just in case somebody does, you can draw 2 cards and then discard 1 card. This one is definitely a sleeper because I think most people, when they think of bombs, they like to think of like the rares or the secret rares, but this common is actually really strong. Next, we have Luffy, a 9-cost, 10,000 power secret rare. On play, you may return 1 or more Dawn cards from play to your Dawn deck. Draw 1 card, then this character gains Rush for this turn. So as you can see, cards that have Rush with huge stat lines are pretty strong in this game. So yeah, the Luffy and the Shanks both being a high stat line and then being able to get some advantage from this Luffy is very nice, therefore qualifying it as a bomb in my opinion. And then finally, another rush unit. We have a 10-cost, 13,000 power, the highest power in the game so far, rush unit in Gold D. Roger. It says when your opponent activates blocker, if you or your opponent have 0 life, you win the game. So in this set, there are a lot of blockers, and so Gold D. Roger being able to just win the game off of the back of this effect is very powerful. You're not going to always win with this, and you might not always need it. Just having a huge body every turn, being able to swing that is going to be impossible for your opponent to remove is very important as well. So that does it for the Game Winners. Let's go on to removal, where we start off with Shachi and Penguin, a 4-cost, 5,000 power body. This is not your typical style of removal. However, I think power reduction, being able to trade into bodies, is in a way pseudo removal. So it says when attacking, give up to one of your opponent's characters power minus 2,000 for the turn. So this allows you to trade into your opponent's bodies more easily than you would have without this effect. Kind of in the same vein, we have Building Snake, a 1-cost 2,000 power body. It's an activate main. You may place this character on the bottom of its owner's deck. Give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 3,000 power for this turn. Like I said, very much like a Shachi and Penguin, where you are using this to trade into an opponent's character. Ben Beckman, one of the strongest pieces of removal we've seen in a while, and it comes in red. It's an on-play, trash up to one of your opponent's characters with a power of 6,000 or less. It's important here because it says trash. Now, in Limited, it's a little less likely that the trash part is important, but trash is different than KO, so when you do take this into standard play, keep that in mind that some units that say that they cannot be KO'd can instead be trashed with this Ben Beckman. So very powerful here. The other thing here is the stat line is very good. It's a 1k counter, 7 cost, and 7,000 power, so hitting those magic numbers overall. If I'm rating off the bat just the best removal pieces in the game for Limited here in OP-09, Ben Beckman takes the cake for me. Then we have Yasop, which is like Building Snake and Shachi and Penguin, able to reduce the power of an opponent's character, but this time only by 1,000 power, so not nearly as strong of a removal unit as maybe some of the other units we've seen so far, but it is worth noting that you can use this to be able to trade into bodies. Another card in red, and so it looks like red's getting a lot of love here, is we have Lucky Roo. It's a 4-cost 5,000 power blocker. How does this have removal on it? Well, it's very interesting. It's an on KO if your leader has the Red Hair Pirates type, which if you're running Shanks, it's a very possible thing for you to run. Then you can KO up to one of your opponent's characters with an original power of 6,000 or less. Otherwise, this is just a strong blocker, but it does have an ability to KO something, so I wanted to throw this in here for your awareness. Now, if you're running Shanks, here's an event that you might want to consider. It is, I won't forgive anyone who messes with my friends. I hope that's the correct translation there. But it's a 2-cost event that says main. If your leader has the Red Hair Pirates type, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 3,000 power for this turn. Then if your opponent has a character with power 5,000 or greater in play, draw a card. So being able to get some card advantage plus also be able to trade into a body is overall great value. Finally, out of red, we're into green here. We have a 6-cost 7,000 power Sakazuki. It's an on-play. If you have 2 or more rested characters in play, KO up to one of your opponent's cost 5 or lower characters. The way you use this is you swing with some other characters first, and then you play this down to be able to pop one of your 5-cost opponent's characters. Another green card that has some stipulation as far as its effect, it's 5-cost 5,000 power Ace. Now this is important because it's a 2k counter, so this has some versatility here. But it says on play, if you have 2 or more rested characters in play, rest up to one of your opponent's cost 5 or lower characters. Now, resting a character is not the same thing as removing a character. However, I think being able to bypass some units like blockers counts as like a pseudo removal for me, and so I would include it in this section. We have a few other cards that are like this, but I think it's important to note that bypassing, in my opinion, kind of counts as removal. Next, we have 5-cost 6,000 power Monkey D. Luffy. It is an on-play. If you have 2 or more rested characters, choose up to one of your opponent's cost 6 or lower characters, or up to one of your opponent's Dawn and rest it. So this is kind of like that 2k counter we just saw with Ace, however, slightly better because you have more options on what you can use the effect on. Next up, we have an event that is a 3-cost event in green called Thunderlance Flip Pound Phoenix Shot. Once again, I don't know if these translations are correct, but we'll go with it for the sake of this video. It's a main. If you have 2 or more rested characters in play, KO up to one of your opponent's cost 4 or lower characters. As you can see, all of the green cards have some kind of stipulation as far as having characters on your side be rested first for these to happen. However, having 2 or more rested characters on your side, especially if you're attacking, and even if you're going against Bonnie, your stuff's going to be rested anyway, so keep that in mind that these effects are probably easier to pull off than you might realize. Next in blue, we have a 2-cost event called Special Monkey Ball. It's a main. Your opponent returns one of their characters with a cost of 6 or less to the owner's hand. So this is a nice little tempo play, being able to just bounce something back for very cheap as well. And the trigger is return one character with a cost of 3 or less to the owner's hand. That's not bad, but I really like the main effect here. In purple, we have a 7 cost, 7,000 power Sanji. Now, this is another one that bypasses things. It's able to rest a 6 or lower character on play and also gains rush from that too. So this could be really useful for going for game. If your opponent has a blocker up and you need to get past it, you can then play this Sanji. It gains rush and then you can rest that blocker and then go for game with this Sanji. So overall, very strong and useful effect at any point in the game. Back to the power reduction, we have a 6 cost, 7,000 power body in Brook, and it says when attacking, return 1 or more Dawn to your Dawn deck. Choose 2 of your opponent's characters during this turn. They gain minus 2,000 power, so I guess they subtract minus 2,000 power, not gain. So this is very nice if you're familiar with the 7 cost Ace from, I think it's like OP-02 maybe, being able to reduce an opponent's characters by, I think it's like minus 3,000. You can reduce 2 of them. This is kind of like Ace, but a little bit weaker and doesn't gain rush, minus 2,000 power, but you still can trade into those bodies pretty easily. So I think this is a pretty strong card, and at worst, it's a 1k counter in your hand. Another card in purple, we have a 2 cost event called Gum Gum Lightning. This is a main Dawn -2, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a power of 6,000 or less. Now, I don't recommend using this too often. I think putting this in at maybe a 1 of is okay. You want to use this sparingly because you don't want to have to use the Dawn -2 too early in the game. However, if you're in the late game where you're at 10 Dawn, minusing 2 Dawn on your 10 Dawn turn doesn't matter. So this is good for those situations. Otherwise, if you are going to use it before 10 Dawn, please be aware that you do have to minus the 2 Dawn for the effect to take place. And then finally, for removal, we have Kuzan, a 4 cost, 5,000 power body that says on play, you may place one of your opponent's cost 3 or lower characters onto the top or bottom of their life face up, and then your opponent trashes 1 card from their hand. So you're removing a body from the field and the opponent has to go down in hand size. I think this Kuzan's actually really strong as well and might be a sleeper pick to put into your deck. All right, on to the A for advantage. These are cards that will either help you gain cards in hand by drawing or maybe filtering out cards, or I think in some cases denying the opponent some cards. So off the bat, we have Silver's Rayleigh. So it's a blocker, 5 cost, 6,000 power body, 1k counter. On play, if your opponent has 2 or more characters with an original power of 5,000 or more, draw 2 cards and discard 1 card from your hand. So being able to filter your hand plus also go up 1 card and play a blocker all in one play is really strong. So Silver's Rayleigh might be one of the best advantage cards in the game, but we'll see as we go along. I talked about this event being able to minus 3,000 power, but also draw a card if you have a Red Hair Pirates type leader. Otherwise, I wouldn't add this into your deck, but it is worth noting if you're playing Shanks that this event is pretty good. We have Usopp in green, a 4 cost, 5,000 power body. It says on play, if you have 2 or more rested characters, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. So a nice little filter there in case you do have some units that you've already swung with. We have Sabo, a 5 cost, 6,000 power body that says when attacking once per turn, if you have 3 or more rested characters in play, draw 1 card. It counts itself, so all you have to have is 2 already rested and then swing with the Sabo to get this effect going. In blue, we have Dracula Mihawk. I think this one actually might be, in my opinion, the best card advantage card in the OP-09 limited set, as opposed to like Silver's Rayleigh. Silver's Rayleigh, you have to have a certain stipulation met for it to get the card advantage here. However, Mihawk, if you just play down, it doesn't matter what's on the opponent's side of the field. It's a blocker, and you have an on-play draw 2, discard 1. We have Van Augur in black. This is an activate main. You may rest this character. If your leader has the Blackbeard Pirates type, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 3 cost for the turn. That doesn't matter. What we're looking at here is on KO, draw 1 card. So this will probably de-incentivize your opponent into swinging into it. However, if it does happen to be KO'd, then you get a card to replace it. We have Shiryu, which is a 2k counter, but a 3 cost, 4,000 power body. It says Dawn ×1 when attacking. You may trash 2 cards from your hand and then draw 2 cards. This is just a simple filter if you do decide to play this down on the field. Otherwise, it's a 2k counter. Next, we have Nico Robin, a 6 cost, 6,000 power body. When I mentioned that card advantage to me might be denying your opponent cards, this is what I was referring to. It's an on play. If your opponent has 3 or more life cards, trash up to one of the top cards of your opponent's life. So this is able to crit their life. They don't get the card, it goes to the trash, and so they're losing out on gaining cards to their hand. This overall helps with the card advantage because if you are gaining cards from your life to your hand and your opponent is not, hey, guess who has more cards? You do. And then I think one of my sleeper hits for card advantage in this set is Pierre. Not that it's like a sleeper card, but I don't think a lot of people will look at this card too often because you can't really do much with it once it hits the field. However, if you're going second, there's not a lot of things you can do on your 2 Dawn turn, and if you open up with Pierre, playing Pierre to draw 2, discard 2 is really great. And then the fact that this has a trigger of just play the card and you get the advantage of the on play is very strong. So I don't see why you wouldn't want to add this to your deck as a one-of. And then finally, we have Bello Betty, a 3-cost, 4,000 power body on play. If you have 2 or less life, draw 1 card. I think what's important here is that you can just draw a card if you have 2 or less life, although you are going to be in a little bit of a pickle if you are at 2 or less life and you have to play out a 3-cost unit. But regardless, you're able to draw a card off of it, so therefore it counts as card advantage, baby. On to protection. These are things that are blockers or maybe like 2K counters or counter events. So let's go over these really quickly. We do have Silver's Rayleigh, which we mentioned, draws you some cards, but also is a blocker at the end of the day. We have Heat, a 3-cost, 4,000 power blocker. It says on play, give up 20 of your power 4,000 or lower leaders, plus 1,000 power for the turn. That doesn't matter because you're not really playing anything that has that. You're not going to be playing Red Purple Kid. I think that's the only leader that's 4,000 power or less. Next up, we have Yasop, a 5-cost, 6,000 power body. I mentioned earlier the minus 1,000 power when I was talking about removal. However, I didn't mention the on play here. The on play is up to one of your leaders, gains 1,000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn. So for me, I think this counts as protection. Even though it's not a blocker, you are gaining a little bit of card advantage, but also you're protecting yourself by buffing your leader by 1,000 power. Of course, we mentioned Lucky Roo. If you're running Shanks as a leader in this event, it's really good. If you're not running Shanks as your leader, it's just good. Next up, we have Audio, a 9-cost, 9,000 power body. On play, if your leader has the Odyssey type, set up to 3 of your Dawn as active. That's not really going to come up as much. However, the second effect on an opponent's attack once per turn, you may rest one of your Dawn. Up to one of your leader or characters gains 2,000 power for the battle. So this is essentially like a counter event that you pay 1 for and you gain 2,000 power. So that's pretty nice to be able to use that just as a way to either psych your opponent out because they may not know what's coming. And you could just use the Audio as a plus 2,000 power. We have Don Quixote do Flamingo, a 5-cost, 6,000 power blocker, and the end of turn has an effect that says if you have 2 or more rested characters in play, set this character as active. So very nice effect being able to attack with this character and then be able to restand it and use it as a blocker for your opponent's turn. Then we have his counterpart, Don Quixote Rosinante, a blocker that says when an opponent attacks once per turn, set this character as active. So both of those cards are blockers that can restand themselves. So some nice little utility there. And of course, I mentioned Dracula Mihawk, probably my favorite blocker from the OP-09 set, just because of the fact that it has the built-in draw 2, trash 1. Then we have Richie, a cheap blocker here for 2 cost, 2,000 power, and not much more outside of that. It's just a nice little blocker to throw down in the late game if you have some Dawn to spare, or maybe in the early game just to build up a wall of blockers. And then we have Tony Chopper. It is a 5-cost, 6,000 power body. End of your turn, return 1 or more Dawn to your Dawn deck. Set this character as active. Then this character gains blocker until the end of your opponent's next turn. So kind of like the Rosinante or the Doflamingo that can restand themselves. This allows itself to restand at the end of your turn. You do have to return a Dawn to your deck, but I think that's okay because if you're at like 10 Dawn, once again, it doesn't matter. Next up, we have Nico Robin, a 2-cost, 2,000 power blocker, another little cheap blocker to throw down. Nothing more to say here. Then we have Frankie, an interesting blocker that says on play, Dawn -2, discard 1 card from your hand and then draw 2 cards. This is also one of these cards where you might not want to subtract that much Dawn in a single turn, so it's a good late game play to use to be able to filter your hand and then have a blocker as a result, so you're gaining some card advantage. I actually didn't include this one in the card advantage, so I probably should. So I'm making a small addendum here. This Frankie also should be included in card advantage. Then we have Gum Gum Giant, which is probably the best, I would argue, maybe best, counter event in OP-09. It's a counter event that says Dawn -2. Once again, be wary of minusing 2 Dawn in a turn. You may trash 1 card from your hand. If your leader has the Straw Hat Crew type, give up to one of your leader or characters plus 4,000 power for this battle, then draw 2 cards. Now, in a limited environment, this one isn't as good of a counter event as maybe like it would be in a standard event because you do have to have a Straw Hat Crew type leader. However, you could be running Luffy. There's a bunch of Luffy leaders. The red Luffy leader that I mentioned at the beginning of the video is solid for you to run this with. So it would be worth, potentially running this. It also has some card advantage built into it, but I think that because you have to have a Straw Hat crew, I don't really want to put this in the card advantage section because, yeah, it's a little bit too specific on what you need, but it is worth mentioning that you do get to draw 2 cards after using the effect. In black, we have Katarina Devon, which is a 5-cost 6,000 power body. Activate main once per turn if your leader has the Blackbeard Pirates type. Until the end of your opponent's next turn, this character gains double attack, banish, or blocker. There's a world where you could be running Blackbeard. It's not an awful leader to play in this event. It's not a great leader to play in this event, but you could run it. And if you do, Katarina is a card you would want to include. Then we have Vasco Shot. Like Nico Robin and Richie before it, it is a simple chump blocker, 2-cost 2,000 power body with a 1k counter. Nothing more, nothing less. And of course, I have to mention the 10-cost 12,000 power Marshall D Teach. It's a blocker. The activate main once per turn is very irrelevant. It only applies to Blackbeard Pirates, but if you are running Blackbeard, then this effect is amazing and this card turns into a bomb. However, because you are not running Blackbeard, more than likely, it's just a blocker that your opponent will not be able to break through. It's almost bomb worthy because of the stat line. However, you are taking your entire turn to play this thing down. On the flip side, you are taking your entire turn to play this thing down, and you can protect yourself the following turn because 12,000 power is a lot to get through. And then also in black, this one I think is probably your best counter event if you're not playing a Straw Hat Crew type. But Black Spiral is a 2-cost counter event that says nullify the effects of one of your opponent's leader or characters and then give them minus 4,000 power during this turn. So it's essentially a 2-cost 4,000 power counter event, but it also allows you to nullify the effects of that character, which is pretty cool. Then we have Karasu in yellow. It's a 3-cost 4,000 power body blocker. That's about it. The trigger is if you have a Revolutionary Army type, and then you and your life totals with your opponent are like 5 or less, play this card. You might use the trigger if you're running red, yellow, Sabo, but that's very oddly specific. Don't count on the trigger happening. Then we have Koala, a 6-cost 6,000 power body blocker on play. You may add the top or bottom of your life to your hand, play up to 1 4-cost or less Revolutionary Army character from your hand, and draw 1 card. I guess this counts as card advantage. However, you are losing a life, which losing life does suck in Limited because you don't want to have to take your own life. You want your opponent to force your life instead. Then finally, we have Jaguar de Sol. This is a 3-cost 5,000 power blocker. The trigger is only applied if you are playing Nico Robin. It's able to be played out for free. However, it doesn't have a trigger if you're not Nico Robin. And the other thing is it doesn't have a counter on it. So that does kind of suck, but it does have vanilla stat line status. And it is a blocker, which is at the end of the day very nice, And then finally, in protection, we have all of these 2K units. I'm not going to go through each one of them individually, but you can see on the screen, if it has 2K on the side of the card, absolutely 100% add it into your deck. You need these cards to stay alive. The more you get, the more chances you have of staying alive. I think in my last pre-release, I only opened like 2 of them, and it was really awful, and it was hard to play. We made it through, but man, I wanted more. So as many 2K counters as you can get. I couldn't space this out evenly. As you can see, I had as you can see, I have Kuma awkwardly placed in front of another 2K because there wasn't much room on this screen, but the card behind it is Nico Olvia, which is a 2K counter that has a on-play effect that only applies to Nico Robin. So anyway, I digress. What I'm trying to get my point across here is if you see a 2K counter, make sure to add it to your deck. And then everything else are, for me, just vanillas. So these are your 3-5s, your 4-6s, your 5-7s, your 7-9s. I'm not going to name each one of these individually, but as you can see, these are your vanillas. These will help you win more games than any other card that you'll come across. These are very important, very, very important. Make sure you are filling your deck with these cards because these cards help you win the games, like I said, more so than getting the bombs. These things are your commons, your uncommons, and you're going to get a bunch of these. Being able to play things on curve that have really strong stat lines that will force your opponent to counter out when they do come swinging at your opponent is very worthwhile. So trust me, if you haven't played a limited set before, if this is your first time, make sure to add as many of these as possible. And then if you have cards where you can sprinkle in bombs, obviously put the bombs in, but these are really, really important. I cannot stress that enough. Put vanillas in, put your 2Ks in, and if you play the game very sound and fundamentally correct, then you should be set for success in these pre-release events. well, that about does it for all of the cards worth mentioning in OP-09 for your pre-release event, your second anniversary out there. Hopefully you guys have fun. Hopefully you guys learned something from this and can take away what you need to draft from the cards you get from your packs. Good luck in opening some fire. Hopefully you guys get something good out there. I feel like the past couple of sets that I've played, I've not gotten anything good. So maybe I'm giving all of my luck away to you guys. So let me know if you get anything good. Let me know how you do in your pre-release tournaments. As always, thank you so much for watching. There's a lot of content coming, so please make sure to sub and like. I appreciate you guys as always, and I'll see you guys in the next video.